Hello, friends. We're starting a spring fundraiser and we're looking specifically for monthly supporters. Every day, people ask me, how's the ministry going? And honestly, that's a really hard question to answer because there's two answers to it. On the one hand, it's going fantastic. Every day, Peter and I get to come into this office and help people through spiritual direction, through this podcast, through our weekly emails, personal phone calls. Every day, we're seeing more and more people find out about us. And we're actually able to individually and in group ways help people strengthen their relationship with Jesus. And we get to walk with them compassionately. It's awesome. On the other hand, we've had to reduce our salaries this year to balance our budget. Now, the good news is we have balanced our budget. But in order for the Booth family and the Gamble family to continue doing this work uninterruptedly, we need your help. We intentionally chose to be a ministry, to be supported by people like you, so that we could offer what we do either free or extremely affordably. We want to help people. We're so grateful for those of you who have supported us for so long. If you haven't yet, please join us and become a monthly supporter. Our goal is to raise an additional $2,000 a month. So please join us. Go to signpostin.org/donate and become a monthly supporter today. Again, signpostin.org/donate. And thank you so much. Welcome to the Back Porch, everybody. It is good to see you. I'm your host, Brandon Booth, and I'm joined by my regular co-host, Peter Gamble. Peter, good to see you, man.
Hey, good to see you, Brandon. Missing you, Matt, if you're listening.
Yeah, Matt has not been able to join us for a couple of episodes, and we're looking forward to having him back. Not much news today, listeners. I think by the time this comes out, we'll kind of be really far into our spring, into our summer even, perhaps. So that's kind of a slow time for us, which is kind of nice. We get a chance to rethink things and do some work that we haven't been able to do during the spring. And once the stuff picks up again in the fall with our fall retreat and other events, things get busy again. So hope that you are enjoying your spring/summer. If you have big summer plans and you're going to go and do some awesome things this summer, hey, I'd love to hear about it. Just for fun, shoot me an email, post on our Facebook group what you're doing this summer. I'd love to share something, Peter, actually, about an update.
Yeah.
So update from the back porch. This actually just came to me, which is I've actually been able to talk to a few people recently about helping them plan a sabbatical time. And that's been really interesting. Some people God has brought them to me in various ways. And it's been a lot of fun to do a little bit of sabbatical coaching, prepping people to think about how to take a sabbatical, what a sabbatical is for, how to prepare and sort of on-road and off-ramp from the sabbatical back into real life and things like that. Really fascinating and really fun. And for whatever reason, this summer seems to be the summer that some people are taking their sabbaticals. So if that's you, listeners, we'd love to help you with that too. We've got a lot of good information about taking sabbaticals, what they are and what they're not. We should maybe do a podcast episode on what a sabbatical is, Peter. That'd be kind of fun. It's fresh in my mind. I've been talking about it a lot lately. I also, listeners, when you hear this episode, the Booth family is just about to drive down to see the eclipse, to get into the path of totality for the eclipse that happened in April. So that tells you when we're recording. And we've seen one eclipse before. We went up and saw, I guess it was 4 years ago, the path of totality passed north of us in Wyoming, and we drove all the way up to see that. And Peter, I was so skeptical the whole time. I was like,
Yeah.
oh, this is stupid. Driving up to I had 4 hours of it, and
Sure.
And my wife, the whole time, she's like, it's going to be worth it. It's going to be worth it. I'm like, how could it ever be worth it? This is too much traffic, too many people. And holy cow, was it worth it? I saw a cartoon. Do you know who XKCD is?
Nope.
Okay, he's a cartoonist that does math and other funny cartoons like that. And he did this graph of its proximity to the totality, like how close you are to the channel of totality and interest. And so it's basically the graph is a flat line until you get into the path of totality, and then it's the spike to 100, and then it drops back down and goes to a flat line. And it's got two little people standing on it right outside the path of totality, and they're like, "This should be awesome. We're at like 92% eclipse." And he says the subtitle is, "Outside of the totality, an eclipse is like a cool sunset. Inside the totality, it's like the end of the world." It's like, and it's so true. Totality is a completely different experience. So hopefully the weather will be good. It might rain, but we're hoping to be able to actually see it.
Nice. That
Anyway,
sounds really fun. I don't think I've ever. I can't recall an experience of seeing a total eclipse. So
yeah, if you ever have the opportunity to do it, it is, listeners, it's actually worth driving 10 hours to see. I'm not kidding. So anyway, so what are your updates, Peter?
oh man, I was thinking as we were sitting down to record, I'm like, oh, what's going on? What's some fascinating tidbit? But honestly, life has just been really busy right now with being like 7.5 months pregnant. My wife and I are expecting our first, and on top of that, we've been having some unfortunate um, situations with our apartment right now. So we're also in like the midst of getting prepared to move and starting like newborn classes and stuff. And so I was like, I don't know what. I guess that is new. That's like an update. Like that's a lot of that stuff's going on, but I feel like my ability and attention to everything else outside of that has dropped way off in
Yeah.
recent weeks. So yeah, it's just been really exciting, but it's been a lot to handle.
Yeah.
I didn't want to move this far into my wife's
Yeah.
pregnancy, so
Right. Right.
a little
Well, and
exhausted.
yeah. And listeners, again, by the time you hear this, that'll all be done. It's even possible that baby Gamble will be here by the time you hear this.
Yeah.
But that explains why we're recording so early. Uh, it's because Peter does the editing of the podcast. So we're trying to get some episodes in the bank, so to speak, edited while he still has time before he has to move, before baby comes and he gets to take paternity leave. So that's
Yeah.
why we're doing it. And Peter, by the way, thank you for editing the podcast. You do a phenomenal job. And listeners, it's not a small job. He's constantly listening to this stuff over and over and over again and making sure that when I say something really stupid, he covers for me. So I I have to treat him really well because I don't. But no, I mean, Peter, honestly, I don't know if people know that you both are a co-host and the actual editor. So thank you. It's you do a darn good job of
Yeah.
editing.
Well, it's a lot of fun, and I tell you the experience during recording, right? Like, when you're just in a conversation, I have like 10,000 things going through my head sometimes like not even podcast related, like with family stuff. I'm like, oh man, tomorrow I've got to meet with blah, blah, blah about the apartment. And so like sometimes listening back as the editor, I'm like, by George, it made sense. I'm surprised because I'm like in the moment, I'm just like, right, conversation. Like, so it's kind of
Hey.
like a blessing to me. I'm like, oh, well, I
Yeah.
remember feeling completely like scramble minded
Yeah.
and yet it came out somewhat okay. Awesome.
Yeah. That makes me think about my experience prior to starting a podcast. Long-time podcast listener. Like, I love podcasts. I especially like the debate and complicated topic podcasts, right?
Hmm.
But it's so funny because listening to a podcast, you're I'm in such a different emotional space and there's no pressure to respond. Nobody's listening to me. I cannot tell you how many times I'm listening to some of these podcasts and I'm thinking, well, you idiots. It's obvious. It's just like, oh man, you should have said this. And there's an obvious point you're missing here. And then realizing, of course, that it's so different when you're actually in the conversation, right?
Yeah.
And there's no way you have that kind of space to think. It's just I've had to like, I hate to admit it, but I've like sort of apologized, not actually obviously, but like when I'm listening to a podcast, I've like apologized to people I've listened to in the past, and I've been like, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I've been such an arrogant jerk." So
Oh, man.
I get it. Anyway, speaking of all that, not apropos of nothing now, let's move into our episode for today.
Yeah.
This episode is titled something like Faith for Fiery Days, suggestions to improve your emotional resilience around this or any morning's news. I'm not sure if that'll be the actual title on the podcast cover, but that's the theme and the topic for today. I actually wrote a little piece for our email a couple weeks ago on this topic, and it was just titled that Faith for Fiery Days. You could probably find the blog post on our website
Yeah.
still. And shameless plug for the email. If you'd like to get this kind of stuff in your newsletter, in your email box every Tuesday, sign up, signpost10.org. We'll even give you a free ebook. But here's the premise. We've been talking about this a lot on the show. We've been talking about we've been talking a lot about this in the office. This year sucks. This year is full of chaos. It is only getting worse the closer to the election we get. And it can be truly terrifying to read the news at any given moment. And if you're the kind of person who opens up a news app on your phone or watches the news in the evening, you know that one, it sells really well to be terrifying. If the scarier the headline, the the more likely it is that people will click on it and or watch it. But I believe my experience is especially this election cycle, you don't even really need to try to write scary headlines. Like they're not even overstating things. They just are that scary these days. So we wanted to offer some suggestions, some help from the perspective of God and Christianity for staying emotionally resilient, which is a fancy way of saying not panicking and dying during the scary news cycles. That's the topic. It's hopefully going to be a pretty practical episode with some things that you can actually use. I do want to start a little bit kind of big picture though. Peter, there's this, I've been listening to a podcast. Actually, it's a interview, Jordan Peterson actually interviewing Ian McGilchrist. And if you don't know who those people are, it doesn't really matter. But in this particular episode, there's two quotes that pop out in this conversation. And Ian McGilchrist, he's a neuroscientist, a philosopher, a literary. I mean, he's one of these like polymaths that knows everything. Also, he has a really cool British accent, which makes him, he's already 10 points smarter than everybody else just because of the accent. Anyway, he says this at one point in the show. He says, the kind of attention you pay governs what you find. I'll say that again. The kind of attention you pay governs what you find. And then later in the episode, on a similar vein of topics, Jordan Peterson says it slightly differently. He said, the world reveals itself in accordance with your intent. The world reveals itself in accordance with your intent. And both of those quotes to me, first, are just fascinating, but second, are really relevant to this idea of being able to stay centered and calm during a really chaotic election year and news cycle. Because the point is that what we attend to, what we are picking out as important to attend to in the world, sort of sets the boundaries or opens and closes the realm of possibility for action. And that's a much bigger point than it may sound at first, but it's something that I don't think we have talked about much um, in most of our Christian circles. We're sort of preoccupied with behavior. Like, what's the right way to behave? What's the wrong way to behave? What's the right practice to do? Wrong practice to do? What's the right belief to have? Wrong belief to have, etc. And we don't, ironically, attend to our faculty of attending. Here's what I mean, and then I'll shut up and let you respond. But attention, and this is from the episode, plus many other people have noted this, and this is not unique to Ian McGilchrist or Jordan Peterson. They're pulling on,
Yeah.
honestly, they're actually pulling on the ancient Christian tradition. But um, how we attend to things, how we notice stuff, is sort of inherently a moral thing. If you think about the power of attention, right? It's kind of necessarily a spotlight. So at any given moment in our day, there's a whole bunch of stuff going on around us. But we can only really focus our attention on a narrow stream of that information. Just eyesight is the same way, right? You have peripheral vision, but you also have this focal vision where I'm seeing your face right now and I'm aware of the stuff around me, but it's really you that I'm attending to. And you can be more aware of other stuff that's in your peripheral, but you have to choose what you're going to focus your eyes on.
Right.
And so there's a inescapable kind of value judgment that happens in that, because at any given moment I'm valuing focusing here more than over there.
Mm.
And if you expand that now outside of like vision, well, think about what you attend to in your life. What occupies your mind? What occupies your mental attention throughout your days? Well, you're sort of, without noticing it perhaps, creating a hierarchy. You're choosing what you're going to pay attention to and saying that's more important to me to pay attention to than all the other stuff that's out there that I could pay attention to. So it's sort of like the structure of attention itself has to be this kind of moral choice, because I don't have the capacity to attend to everything all at once with the same amount of energy. All right, how does that connect? Well, Philippians 4 is one of our kind of key verses for our email, right? Wherein Paul says, okay, even though the day is stressful, in everything, pray, praise, and give thanks, for the Lord is near. Well, think on these things, whatever is true, whatever is good, whatever is lovely, whatever is honorable, etc.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if you go back to that passage, you can see it's really there's a structure of attention being prescribed or recommended there. Yes, the world is fiery and chaotic. Yes, are terrifying and unstable and uncertain. And we're not supposed to pretend like that's not true. But Paul really encourages us to fill our minds, our attention, with the presence of God, that he is actually present, etc. So I don't know. There's a big introduction from a 30,000-foot view. I don't know. Thoughts?
Yeah. Yeah, like, I feel like the implications of that are pretty big, which, like, it's just hitting me like, wow, that's pretty formative to think about, what we pay attention to, what I pay attention to as, um, even an inherently moral choice. It's kinda convicting for me, honestly. Like, there's part of my brain that goes there like, "Man, like, some of the things that I, like, immediately gravitate towards, are a lot of my hobbies and interests. So that's like whenever I'm like, all right, done my responsibilities, and I'm like, great, like let me think about this stuff. So probably something for me to chew on there. But as you were talking, the imagery, and I want to see if this lines up with what you were
Mm,
saying, but the analogy that helps me think about it is almost like a financial sort of thing. Because uh, pay attention, right? Pay is like
mhm,
a money term, right? You pay
mhm,
money for
mhm,
something. So like the imagining my attention as like a currency that I'm like, every moment that I'm like giving some of my attention dollars to something, and it's like an investment. And what I'm hearing you say in connection to where we put our attention, like, paves the way for, like, further future action or behaviors. I can't
mhm,
remember exactly how you framed that, but I was thinking, okay, that's sort of like I invest in a certain, like, area of my life, interests, or, like, and that sort of attention that I'm investing into that paves the way for action in that area. And
mhm,
so there has to be sort of this both I'm attending to what I then want to, like, follow through with, and sort of the disjunction comes when it's like, I'm naturally attending to all these other things, the crazy world around me, the stress and anxiety, but then you know, then I'm like, well, what I should do then is, fix something," but there's, like, no investment in that realm of category. All I've invested in my attention is, like, the fearful paths of fretting and worrying, and so it's harder to switch.
yeah,
I don't is that in line? Does that make sense?
yeah. I think actually that's a further development. So it's that okay, what you just talked about reminds me of the Proverbs talking about buying wisdom
Hmm,
and not being distracted by the thing people who are peddling foolishness in the marketplace. Right? So the image is sort of like you young men, young women, they have money to spend. They have attention dollars to spend. And the advice that the older men in the Proverbs give them is go use that money to purchase wisdom from the older, wiser people. On your way, don't get distracted by the foolish young men who are peddling violence and foolishness and all this other stuff. And certainly don't get distracted by the prostitutes who are peddling even worse stuff that takes you down into hell. Um, but of course, that's a good image of we might say the intellectual moral landscape, right? You can see how that's immediately connected to this idea that what you pay attention to, what you pay your attention dollars to, either opens up the possibility for behavior. It's like you see more options or closes down your options. And of course, the people peddling foolishness in the marketplace of ideas or just the marketplace of attention, which is what the marketplace is, then the people peddling foolishness are always closing your options down so they can absorb more of your attention dollars. They want to keep, I mean, geez, this is so obvious. These metaphors write themselves, right?
yeah, yeah.
Like I found out the other day, for example, that the Facebook algorithm penalizes a poster if you put a link off platform. So if you post on Facebook a link to your YouTube channel or to your blog article or whatever else,
Mm,
then the algorithm demotes you and shows your stuff less often. If, on the other hand, you post those things on Facebook and link to the things on their platform, then it promotes you and makes your stuff more visible, which is
mm,
exactly the point. It's like they are trying to lock you into one little channel.
yeah.
Um, And I think that's so then we can shift to a different metaphor, or back to kind of the metaphor I was thinking of at the first time, which is, imagine yourself hiking in the forest, and if you get tunnel vision on the path ahead of you, it's really easy to get lost. If you're only looking at the first couple of feet ahead of you, it's really easy to get lost because you're not attending to the signs, the alternate paths, what's going on around you. Whereas if you have a freer, more open attention, one that's less constricted for whatever reason, fear or whatever, then you're going to make wiser decisions because you're going to have more options for choice. You're going to notice the path that goes off in another direction. You're going to notice the sign that points this way to whatever. Um,
Mhm.
so, in that broader sense, like attention, what you attend to really does govern what you find. Let's transition this into the actual show. What am I looking for? What am I trying to find by kind of narrowing my attention to the daily news? Like, here's a hypothesis. I think what we're looking for, what we're attending to in the daily news cycle, is some kind of control and some kind of escape. And by that I mean, there's the illusion of control that if I know everything that's going on and I have all the information, that will somehow allow me
Mm.
to manage it and keep myself safe. And then secondarily, if I'm kind of consumed with outrage and fear over what's going on in every other part of the world but my own, I don't really have to attend to my own world, which is probably really scary. And
Mm.
I feel, I don't have to attend to what's going on inside of me if I can keep a constant steady flow of sort of fake emotional activation going on. You know what I mean? Like, it works. The daily news cycle, especially the social media and television news, works a little bit like a constant steady stream of a drug. It's sort of like getting a IV of speed. You just always feel angry and activated and scared, which is a really nice way to cover up ever feeling any of your other feelings or
Mm.
ever dealing with any of the feelings that you have about yourself or your immediate life.
Yeah. Do you think that seems like a subconscious move though, right? Like I, I'm I don't know. I can understand that, and certainly um, I can relate to that as well. I certainly want to escape some of my own circumstances by looking at everyone else's circumstances, right? Let me try and fix everyone else's problems, not my own. That's a relatable sort of thought process, but also I feel like that can be a subconscious thing where it's almost don't want to use the word victim because right, but like you said, like somebody's like giving drugs and like you kind of get hooked, like subconsciously get pulled into the current of things. Whereas like I think there's a lot of compassion for all of us who feel stuck and triggered by everything and in this cycle of just like the world's burning. How can I not like freak out to everything? Like it's almost a natural and very understandable response. It's not I
Yeah.
don't think many of us go through that thought process and say, "Hmm, my life feels unsafe, therefore I click on the news." It's just part of the symptoms of this crazy, current of chaos that we kinda live in.
Yeah. In our current state, we are just really easily distractible, right? And like, to build off of your call for compassion, look, if you go to, I remember as a kid going to the um, county like fairs, And I don't know why they don't do these as much anymore, but like we have one here in Canyon. Uh, it's Blossom Festival coming up at the end of May, right? Or beginning of May. And it's really fun. I love the places where all the vendors are. They have all the tents and all the vendors. But I remember being 9 years old and wandering around during those kinds of events, having been given like $5 to spend. And I inevitably bought some piece of crap that I was regretted buying 10 minutes later, because it was a street vendor trying to give me, I don't know, whatever junk it is that they were selling. But what else was I gonna do? I mean, I'm 9 years old, I have $5 burning in my pocket, and boy, that stuff is flashy, and the guy was nice, and there's 50,000 booths as far as I could tell, and overwhelming number of choices, and everything was cool. And like, they're hanging stuff, and they got the things flying around. I mean, it's always really, really a lot of information, a lot of distraction, a lot of choice.
Mm.
And the 45-year-old guy who runs the booth and has been at every one of these fairs for the last 6 months knows exactly how to grab the attention of a 9-year-old boy and pitch him on buying this piece of junk. And I just feel like that's kind of the
Mm.
image I have of what you're describing. Yeah. The devil's, if what we're saying is true, that attention is really basic in morality, then no wonder that the devil is a master of distraction.
Mm.
Like, he knows exactly where to attack.
Yeah.
And also, I think you're right. One of the results of the fall is we're alienated from ourselves. Like, we don't even notice. It takes a huge amount of effort to even notice that we're noticing things. you know, like, to attend to how we attend to things, that
Mm.
doesn't that's been broken.
Yeah. Yeah. So Brandon, what do we do about this? What do we do
I
in
don't
this
know.
crazy, chaotic what do we do in
Yeah.
this circus of life that's everyone's vying for attention, doomsday preachers are out there saying everything's falling apart. How are we ever
Yeah.
supposed to have 1 inch of emotional resilience and ability to not freak out and spend all our attention dollars at the
Yeah.
somebody yelling that we're all, gonna
Yeah.
die?
Yep. I think I think your call for compassion is the place to start. I've sort of got, for fun little helpful three-part here's my three-part outline, but I offered 3 basic ideas. 1 is acceptance, 2 is perspective, and 3 is connection. But I think your call for compassion is the great segue into what acceptance means.
Mm.
We find ourselves in this bizarre of ideas and emotions and all this stuff constantly being peddled in an illusory dream of control, an illusory dream of happiness, if we can just get the next story read or whatever. And so I think the first response uh, is to back out for long enough, like turn off that stuff long enough to become aware of my own emotions and my own state. It's like you have to take a deep breath, basically.
Mhm.
And then the practice that follows that, and we may have these out of order. Perspective probably should come first, but let's go ahead and talk about acceptance first. Um, the principle at play is control what you can, not what you can't. Here's a fun exercise to do. Make a list of everything that you cannot control that has vied for your attention over the last week. And I will just sort of prep this for you. You can't control the war in Ukraine. You can't control the polarization of America. You can't control the typhoon that hasn't happened, but I'm making it up, right? You can't control the earthquakes that are happening in the world. You can't control the diseases that are coming out. Okay, that's all world scale. That's pretty obvious. You also can't control the traffic in your own town or city. You can't control what the mayor said yesterday. You can't control the crime rate. What else can you not control? Well, let's zoom in even closer. You can't control how your wife feels. And I know the closer we to home we get, the stronger the illusion becomes. Well, if I did do this, my wife would feel. No, kind of carefully separate that out. You may be able to influence the way she feels, but you can't control it. You can't control the choices your children make. You can't control whether your house is leaking or your apartment is flooding. You can't, so like these, and then let's zoom even in closer. You can't control what you did in the past.
Mm.
You can't control what you're going to do in the future. Keyword being control. Again, you might be able to influence it, but you can't control it because you can't control all the circumstances in the future. You can't control your own emotions. Go back and listen to our episode with Heidi, that emotions are not the kind of thing that either you would want to have control over, first of all, completely, nor can you actually. Again, you have some control over them, but you have some influence over them, but you don't have the ability to totally control them. Heck, man, we don't even have control over what we dream at night. So, like, there's so much that we don't have control over. All right, now make the opposite list. What can you control? And that list is really short. In essence, it comes down to one thing. I can control my behavior in the present moment. And I sort of challenge you to think of anything else that you actually have total control over, anything you actually really can confidently say, yes, I have control over that. I can guarantee the outcome of. No, you don't even have control over the outcome of your choices in the present moment, but you do have control over your choices in the present moment.
Mm.
So far, so good. There's one more step to that.
Yeah, I'm just thinking if that's the one thing we control, that's why our attention is so powerful because we can
Right.
decide what to do with our attention in the present moment, and that's it.
Right.
Mm.
And then that is okay, you can go two directions with that. You could say, oh man, that's a huge burden. Now I have to be constantly controlling my choices in the present moment. And there's a sense in which that's true. Here's where, we could cross streams and talk about the law and the gospel. Yeah, I have to acknowledge I have responsibility for my choices in the present moment, and I bear the responsibility for the choices I made in the past, etc. But there's also a huge relief to this, which is I am not required by anybody, let alone God, to control the direction and the fate of the world, to control the direction and fate of my city, to control the direction and fate of my family, or even to control the direction and fate of my life. None of those things are my responsibility. Obviously, I'm going to have more influence. The choices I make here and now in the present are going to influence those spheres more or less, but they're not my responsibility to control. And that's just a really nice relief. So this is all in this concept of acceptance. It's accepting reality as it really is,
Mm,
right? The constant news cycle peddles a false sense of control, which the illusion is that's going to make you feel better because if you get control, you can be safe. But of course
mm.
you can't control the world. It's not possible. The effort to do so or the illusion that somehow gaining enough information will give you that control just damns you.
And it's pretty obvious.
Right.
After watching the news, do you feel like, do I feel good? Like, no, I don't.
Right.
I feel it's weird how preferable though anger is to feeling unsafe or out of control.
Right.
Like I don't objectively feel good, but I feel angry. I feel like I know who's the problem and I know like who I like what they need to do about it. And I feel justified and somewhat safe in my anger. Even though that hasn't really done anything for me by watching the news, anger feels
Well,
pretty
and it's yeah, but it's an illusion of control and safety, but it's got a double edge to it. It's the illusion of control and safety actually makes you less in control and less safe
hmm,
because it draws your attention away from what actually you can have influence and
right.
control over and makes you incapable of thinking clearly about it. So, yeah, I mean, it's sort of the ancient devil's practice. If I can get you all hot to trot about what's going on over there with them in the other part of the state or world, which you have no influence over, and occupy you all day long with anger and frustration and what they should and shouldn't be doing and how the world would be better if, then I've got you completely not paying any attention to what's actually going on in your present life in this moment.
Mm,
And worse than that, your nervous system and mind and heart and soul are so ramped up that you can't possibly make good decisions in the stuff that's actually in your control in your own life. So it's really a sick trick of the devil, in my opinion, to pull us like that, to make us spend our attention on that kind of stuff. But you're also right about another thing, which is at this stage of the conversation, if acceptance is a really hard thing to do because basically what we're saying is give up your sense of control and only notice that you can only you have very
right.
little control. And that's a terrifying prospect.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that I think leads us to our second point, which is perspective. There's two parts to perspective in my mind. The first one is if you can take a step back from I'm borrowing this phrase from you, Peter, the tyranny of the urgent. You can have a bigger, wider perspective. Are you going to care about the news story you read this morning, this afternoon? Are you going to care about the news story you read this morning next week? Are you going to care about it next year? Are you going to care about it in 10 years? Are you going to care about it after Christ returns, the kingdom has fully come, and we are resurrected to newness of life, immortal with Christ? And it's like just that little progression helps me to put into perspective what's really going on here. I read a news story this morning about, actually, I think it was yesterday, which is so funny, but I read a news story yesterday about a security breach in some software. It's like, because I'm a nerd, I pay attention to this kind of thing and I kind of like it. It's kind of fun, right? There was a possible security breach in a really important package in a Linux system that had the potential to be spread all over the world and make this huge security problem for the whole world. That's a pretty big deal. In a certain sense, it has an immediate impact on all of us. Thankfully, it didn't. It got caught. But in a certain sense, it has an immediate effect on us because that means all of our data would have been easily stealable, right? Okay. Do I care about that story now? Not really. Like a day later, I honestly, if I hadn't known it, it wouldn't have changed my life at all. Will I care about that story in a week? Nope, certainly not. Will I care about that story in a year? No. Let's imagine the story was different though. Let's imagine the story was, yes, this thing is in the wild. Yes, every system pretty much across the internet is compromised. Yes, all your data is basically stealable by whoever wants it. Would I care about that the next day? Yeah, a little bit. I'll tell you what I did about, what I would have done about it, which I've already done. I'd go turn off the ability to get a loan in my name with the credit unions. Okay. Would I care about that in a week? Yeah, maybe. Would I care about it in a year? Probably not, because by then either all my data's already stolen or it's fixed. You know what I mean? And yeah, if I was one of the ones that got caught up and my stuff got stolen and somebody impersonated me and I got my identity stolen, that's a big pain in the butt. Will I care about that in 5 years? Probably not. Will I care about that in eternity? Definitely not. So that's like level one. Level two is perspective. What really matters? And even more importantly, who really matters?
Hmm.
Like, let's say the worst happens and World War III starts and there's food shortages across the nation. And, this election results in all the doomsday stuff that everybody says. I'm not saying that's not going to suck. I'm not saying that's not going to be easy or that's going to be easy or that you're going to feel good about it.
Hmm.
Is God still on his throne? Was he aware that this was going to happen? Is this part of his plan? Will he still be present and active, forming you into the person he wants you to be? And I'm not saying again that makes it so that we just coast through suffering, but having that perspective does make the suffering a little easier because it keeps our attention on the right thing.
Yeah. So I'm hearing like on one hand, just on the human level perspective of like, is this even going to be something I care about in the near future or whatever? Like it's going to blow over. Like I can't even remember what I was stressed about last week, although I know I was stressed. So like, like what was it? Like, was it worth getting worked up over? And then on the other hand, it's like, all right, even if things really are stressful and rotten, there's like the kingdom of God perspective that's outside of just the purely
Mhm.
mankind and, the world perspective that says, is God at work in the crazy brokenness of the world? And
Mhm.
is the story of God's people that is it not a testament to God's continued presence in and through
Mhm.
wide seasons of life that include suffering and hardship and so there's a kind of the perspective is that God doesn't change through
Yeah.
these seasons. He's ever present.
Yeah. It reminds me to go back to Philippians chapter 4 and just look at that again because near
Mhm.
the end there, Paul's giving his kind of parting instructions to the Philippians. And I think read it backwards for a second. Paul at the very end is basically thanking them for supporting his ministry. Um, and thanking them for sending him money. He says this in Philippians 4:10, I rejoiced in the Lord greatly because once again you renewed your care for me. Yeah, this is funny. This is sort of Paul's thank you letter for donating to his ministry, right? He's like, thank you for renewing your subscription or whatever. He says, you were in fact concerned about me, but lacked the opportunity to show it. I don't say this out of need, for I learned to be content in whatever circumstances I find myself. Um, I know how to make do with little. I know how to make do with a lot. And in any case, I have learned the secret of being content, whether well fed or hungry, whether in abundance or need. I am able to do all things through him who strengthens me. Still, you did well by partnering with me in my hardship. So here's Paul sort of thanking them for their support. Even when they couldn't give money, they supported him in prayer. And he says, that's great because I have learned how to be content in every hardship. Well, how? Well, he actually just told them prior to that. So right above that, here's his kind of practical advice. Rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I will say rejoice. Let your graciousness be known to everyone. $1 million question. How? Well, he answers it. The Lord is near.
Mm.
That's the same as saying, I'm able to do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Like, Paul finds his ability to be content in the exact same place he tells people to find their ability to rejoice in everything, which is attend to the reality that God is present. Don't worry about anything, he says, but in everything, through prayer and petition with thanksgiving, present your requests to God, and the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and minds in Christ Jesus. Finally, brothers, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is commendable, if there is any moral excellence, and if there is anything praiseworthy, dwell on these things. So there's a double practicality here in my mind. It's one, pay attention to the reality God is present. Always. He will never leave us, never forsake us. So you can always pray to him. And then two, this is like the think on these things is a very like modern counseling psychology kind of advice. Dwell, fill your attention, your mind with good things. And guess what? You'll feel a lot better. Right? I mean, it's not rocket science. If you're watching hateful, angry, scary stuff all day, you're going to feel scared, defensive. If instead you're paying attention to the beautiful, good, lovely things all day, you're going to feel pretty peaceful and happy and grateful. Let's sort of wrap it up with the third one, which is connection. So we're still answering the original question, which is how do I find peace? How do I find a kind of resilience
Mhm.
to live through the chaotic times? And I guess we could boil it down to this. One, set some good boundaries, which is accept what you can control and not what you can't. Or accept the fact that you can control some things and mostly you can't control it. Gain a little perspective on what's really important. And then the last one would be from that place of much more healthy perspective. Here's what I actually can control and what I can't control. Here's actually the reality I live in that is governed by God. What are then the principles of behavior? Like what can I actually do in this world? And I think that comes down to connection. What I can actually I can't solve the Ukrainian war. I can't fix the broken politics in America. So spending a lot of my time trying to is probably going to be a waste. Now, the caveat, of course, is I'm not saying you shouldn't be involved in politics, that you shouldn't vote, or that you shouldn't even advocate for your political candidate, the one that you want to advocate for. That's
Right.
fine. Amen. We have some influence in some of those spheres. I'm not saying that's not important. It's more of a question of sort of budgeting. It's like, let's budget our attention and time because the place that you have the most impact and the place that you have the most influence is really in your family and your local community. So spend your time there, or at least budget your time more in those areas. Reach out to your friend group and connect with them. And I would even say it this way, because I'm not obligated, I don't bear the responsibility to fix the world. I don't even bear the responsibility to fix my church. I don't even bear the responsibility, quote unquote, to fix my family because my children and my wife have their own choices and I can't control those. The only responsibility I have is to do as best I can with what I have. Well, then I'm free. Rather than I've got to fix my kids, I'm free to love my kids and try to be as positively influential as I can without this like damning requirement that they turn out a certain way. I'm also free to like engage people in my church, recognizing with humility that I can't change the way so and so who sits in pew 3 thinks, but I probably have the ability to influence him with kindness. I could probably have a much better and more lasting impact on him by being kind and loving him and engaging him in conversation that's kind and loving than trying to convince him that his politics are wrong. Not to mention his soul is going to last a lot longer than the United States. So which is more important, right? Like, is the United States more important than an individual's soul? No. The individual's soul lasts forever. The United States lasts for whatever period of time that God has allotted it to last. So let's spend our time on the things that are eternal. I don't know. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it kind of seems like a development of the acceptance and perspective was sort of like getting those in order. It's like, all right, it becomes clear that perhaps the fruitful way to spend my time would be to invest in the people with whom I have connections. If there's
Mhm.
going to be any, fruitful action forward, then likely God is calling me to, inviting me to
Mhm.
make connections, strengthen those connections, and do life with the people that that are in my life, and that's the
Right.
fertile soil for conversation, for love and fellowship, and that I don't know. It sounds like yeah, the community you are around, the connections you have, creating new connections. That's where all this gets lived out.
Yeah. And there's a really interesting point, and I don't, again, Jordan Peterson is the one that introduced me to this idea, but I think he pulls it from somewhere else. But the point is made, don't underestimate the amount of influence that any individual human being has. Because let's say over the course of your life, you have direct influence to some degree over 1,000 people or with 1,000 people. Probably actually there's probably more than that in your life that you've had some kind of semi-significant influence of, right? Over the course of an entire life. Okay. Well, if that's true, then you have influence directly on 1,000 people. They have influence. Each of them has influence on 1,000 people, and each of those people has influence on 1,000 people. Well, now within 3 degrees of separation, you've influenced 1 billion people.
Is that how that math works? Wow.
Yep. Yep. Which is 1/8 of the world's population. Now, obviously, there's that's it's a thought experiment to help you see that let's just keep it at 2 degrees of separation, right? 1,000 times 1,000. Uh, actually, sorry, yeah. Let's see. That's you're at 1 million right there, right? So
Mm.
the the point is this: do you want to clean up and fix the world? Well, unless you're one of the special few who happens to be the president of Russia, you know, um, then you're not going to have that kind of direct control. But the kind of person that you are going through the world over the course of a lifetime has ripple effects throughout the entire world much, much, much larger than you're probably assuming at any given moment. And this sort of harkens back to like Chesterton's idea of the human race as a one whole big organism. And we are all cells within that big organism of the human race. What any individual cell does impacts the entirety of the body. Because if it's sick, the rest of the body has to deal with it. If it's healthy and thriving and reproducing, the body is um, benefited by it. So don't underestimate the incredible, wide influence a life lived oriented towards God and the things of God has.
Mhm.
So, it's sort of like you want to change the world, you want to influence everything else or like the course of world events. Well, focus on becoming someone who chooses well in the present moment,
Mhm.
and your
Mhm.
presence as someone who's learning to grow and trust Christ in that way is going to have a much larger impact than you think. So it's not an either ors. It's not an either or. It's not a either we impact the whole world by getting a lot of power or we just focus on our local community and forget the rest of the world. No, the way you impact the world for the vast majority of us is to focus on our local personal sphere. And that actually does change the world. That's the only way anything ever gets changed anyway, is individuals throughout the world choose differently.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Yeah, and listeners, we know too, like one of the reasons that we exist as a ministry is because we've recognized we looked around and seen so many people we've related to the feeling of like, well, I don't have connection. I don't have a community. This world feels so polarized. I don't even how can I do what you're telling me to do to live this out in my community? I you know, isolation is altogether too easy. And
mhm,
that's part of the reason we exist. We
mhm,
pray that the resources we offer and the time that we are willing to spend with you would help strengthen your relationship with God and provide a place of connection. That's like the inn has always been kind of
mhm,
the an image around the Signpost Inn Ministries where we want you to be able to stop in and
mhm,
and have a place of connection where you can say, "Man, the world," and we're like, "Yep,
mhm,
you can talk," right? Brandon does spiritual direction, which is, I mean, a lot of this in my own life has gotten worked out. A lot of this has been fleshed out in my own experiences of multiple seasons of spiritual direction. So that is huge. And I don't know. I would just want to offer that in the midst of a world that feels so polarized and isolated. This isn't if you can't relate to that, like, oh, I've got that community around me.
mhm,
We wanna provide that or offer that too. You can
mhm,
always reach out to
mhm.
us, join our podcast Facebook group and drop your
Yeah.
questions and thoughts there. We wanna dialogue and have that sense of like we're working through this, as a team, as a signpost and family.
Yeah, and hopefully make connections for you too, right? Like maybe you'll meet somebody else in the end that's has nothing to do with us, but that you can go be a part of that community and find some solace there too. And I do think to wrap
Yeah,
it up, Peter, I think it's again a good recall back to kind of compassion that it's far too easy to get focused on what I'm doing for the community, whereas I think the first call to community is to receive from the community, not to give to. Like the first call that Christ gives us as we gather with the saints is not to serve others, but to allow ourselves to be served. It's the church as a hospital perspective. The first
Yeah.
thing that the community of God does is
Yeah.
bring in tired, sick, broken people and tend to their wounds, So
Yeah.
we're not saying, go find a place to serve. What we're saying is go find a place that will tend to you well, that will love you well, that will heal you as best they can. And when it's time for you to do healing and tending to others, God will make it known. And He'll give you those people. But a community's first job is to tend to people, not to be the place that you are obligated to serve. I think that's a pretty good place to leave it. I hope. Listeners, we'd love to hear your feedback on this. Did we say anything crazy? I don't know. Let us know. And Peter will then retrospectively edit it out. No, just so. Listeners, thank you so much for being with us. We have enjoyed this conversation, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for joining us on the back porch. May the grace of Christ go with you wherever the road takes you.
Amen.
Thanks for listening. This podcast is a production of Signpost Inn Ministries, a nonprofit Christian ministry dedicated to strengthening people's relationship with Jesus and walking with them compassionately on their life's journey. We offer spiritual direction, retreats, and lots of other resources like this podcast. Please visit us at signpostin.org to learn more. We especially want to thank our generous donors who support our work and keep this podcast going. If you've benefited from something you've heard, please consider supporting us by making a tax-deductible gift at signpostin.org/donate. We also want to thank Rex Daugherty for creating the original theme music for this podcast. You can check out more of his work at his website, and you can find all the links in our show notes.